Namaste and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you in different parts of the world. And it's such a great honor to witness this experience. And also I was moved by the little time that I had with Karina Basharova's presentation. It was very, I was moved and emotionally it was pretty connecting. So I'm sure this experience is going to be great. And my name is Paris, and I would like to present today on a very interesting topic about how to look at in-depth executive coaching agreements in corporate and also in private practice. Also like to share my gratitude to Barry Kao for having this wonderful platform to sharing this knowledge of we all coaches have. And the objective of this particular session is to help coaches, maybe new coaches or coaches who are already on the pathway of practicing coaching in either in private practice or in organizations. How do you contract? How do you bring everybody on the same platform? And at the same time, if you are coaching in organizations, maybe you're doing leadership coaching or executive coaching, it's very important to ensure that there is a lot of psychological safety for your client or whom you'll be coaching. At the same time, how are you going to bring everybody, all the other stakeholders on the same platform? So the goal is to help even the corporates to know what to look at when you are contracting with a coach. Many times in my experience, in my past experience, I've seen where I was just told that these are a list of people to be coached, get going, and there is no dialogue when I started initially my journey in coaching. And then what I did coaching, what worked well, did not really match to what the organization was expecting, or the organization was not able to articulate effectively what they're looking at in coaching. So I bring a lot of this, not only the concepts or a framework or a model of how do you coach or how do you contract with your clients, more of my own experience, that why is it important today for coaches to have clear agreement, an explicit agreement between all the parties involved in a coaching space. So I would be happy if you also have any questions, because I'm a person who is very fluid, who is not like ask me questions towards the end. You can ask me questions at any point of time. So if you're looking for more questions that, hey, these are the questions that I have from this particular session, why don't you also put that in a Q&A, and I'll be happy to support in due course of the time. So the first question that I'll put it across to everybody is, what is a coaching agreement or a contract? So I look at coaching agreement or contract as three categories of contract. One is psychological contract, permission, protection, and potency, which I'll be sharing with you shortly in due course of the time. So there is Peter Hawkins has shared in many of his conversations that the formula of agreement is called ABC. That's called always be contracted. And while Eric Berne is one of the popular psychologists, defined contracting as contract is an explicit bilateral commitment to a well-defined course of action. So if we read this sentence, it's not about implicit, it's explicit. That means as clear as we can. It's bilateral and not unilateral. That means it needs to have a saying, acceptance, confirmation from all the parties involved in a conversation, and a commitment to a well-defined course of action. That means what we are looking at engaging with a coach. So in coaching, this is an essential step to establish the relationship between the coach and the client. Contracting defines the outcome and process a client can expect from their coach and during the coaching journey. So So the clearer we are in establishing our expectations of what we are looking at from a coaching session, how the coaching session has to be, what is okay in coaching, what is not okay in coaching. Okay, defining these boundaries helps every coach and a client to be in the same space. And so a contract can be verbal, written, or a combination of both. So here we're not talking about just a legal contract or some sort of law-abiding contract. We're talking about a confirmation of what we are expecting from each other in that particular relationship. So legal could be one part of it, but there is much more than that. It's about partnership. So the question to all of you who are listening to me right now, if you're able to put that in a chat, how many people are coaches who are listening to me right now? Okay, so it looks like everybody's a coach there. And from this coach or people who are listening to me, how many are working in corporate as coaches or doing corporate coaching? Wonderful. And anybody is in an HR or like who works in a corporate in an HR position or some sort of sponsor or decision maker or somewhere you're working in a corporate, may not necessarily you're doing coaching actively. I'm sure this this session can be an interesting space, even if you have some questions or sharings to be done, because this is going to be involving a lot of partnership as well. And the partnership is, how do I connect all of you in one space? Before I move to the next slide, I just want to reinstate that when we're talking about an agreement, we're talking about partnership. We're talking about how your agreements are explicit, bilateral. That means they are in partnership with the teams that are involved in the coaching. So many times your corporate or your individual client, they address the elephant in the room. I'm sure we all have heard about the concept of, where is the elephant in the room?
Yes.
Okay. And in this particular session, I'm going to go beyond than that, is to address the invisible elephant in the room, because the key word is explicit. So many a times we just address the elephant in the room, maybe questions like this particular employee lacks communication skills or not able to, we need to develop competency like emotional awareness. But then what is the underlying space that needs to be addressed is what your agreements or having clear coaching agreements are going to help you. When you're looking at contracting with any client, let's say you are you're doing private practice in coaching. So when you're looking at an agreement or contracting, we need to explore these three aspects of contracting. So the first part that we look at is called the professional contract. The professional contract or an agreement talks about the areas that we need to work with a client. So we talk about the visible elephants, certain competencies, certain behavior aspects that needs to be explored, work together. Maybe you get a client who says that I have difficulty dealing with my work life, I have difficulty dealing with my schedules or dealing with my boss. So these all fall into the professional contract. So you work on professional development of that client. The next comes is the administrative contract. Now, the administrative contract talks about what all is involved in this process. Let's say in a private practice, a client comes to you and is not aware about the fees, is not aware about when to pay the fees, is not aware about how this whole coaching process works. Are you allowed to call me? Are you allowed to message me? Are you allowed to email me? All of these aspects, or more than that, we need to explore in the administrative contract. So it also involves an administrative contract is how our sessions are scheduled, how do I book the sessions, when do I book your sessions, what is the cancellation policy, am I allowed to cancel sessions randomly, or is there a particular time limit or within 48 hours. So as explicitly we determine when to review your sessions. Like if the client contracts for 12 sessions, maybe after the 5th session or the 6th session, we do a review of how far have we reached and how are we progressing further. So again, this is a very important aspect where many times we just miss out. And then we look at the most important and the most critical part is called the psychological contract. Now, here in psychological contract is more to look at confidentiality, privacy. Then we talk about how comfortable are we sharing information? How do we build trust? Because that's the foundation of your whole coaching process. So when we look at psychological contract, we need to be very sure about a very simple thing like I explicitly talk to my client that, if I see you in a coffee shop, let's say Starbucks, am I allowed to say hello to you? Okay, as clear, because maybe the client is coming to me with a space that nobody should know I'm coming for coaching. I do not want anybody to know. So as explicitly when you bring that conversation, that gives a lot of comfort for the client that, hey, this coach I can trust, I can work with him. So if you're a coach and doing private practice, make sure that you're aware about the professional contract, the administrative contract, and psychological contract. And having all this agreement is going to lead a lot of trust and intimacy with you and your client. And also, if you're in a corporate setup, whenever you're contracting with your client or with a coach, you need to make sure that you're aware about all of these aspects so that you know the whole process of coaching, or the process of coaching can be established effectively. While the other aspect of it is Julie Hayes, one of the very famous psychologists and psychotherapists. So she talked about how do we develop the contract in business, and she talks about the 6 levels, which again is coming from the 3 what I shared with you, but in a different words. One is called procedural. That means we talk about the administrative details, or who all are involved in this contract, who are we working with, what is the process, how the coaching is going to start and end. The next comes as a professional, which talks about the competency development of the person. The third talks about the purpose, maybe what is the bigger purpose, or what is the purpose of doing this coaching, whether it's an individual coaching or a group coaching coming together. Then we talk about the personal, how the relationship and communication process be established. The next part to talk about is a psychological process, where what might occur outside our awareness. That means can we envision, or can we think about what all other things that can create a derailer in the process of coaching, or how we might unconsciously sabotage the process of coaching if we are not able to maintain a psychological contract properly. And the last part, she talks a very interesting thing, which is called physis. Now, physis means where the coach and the client are ready for the goal, and the process begins, and there is a very positive outcome. So it's like a complete alignment from start to end. Excellent. So before I could move to the next slide, I just want to check in with you. If you have any questions which are coming to the surface, like you would like to ask me any questions here, I'm happy to support. At the same time, if you would like to also share, how are you feeling having this conversation this afternoon for you?
I noticed there's some question about what's the concrete elements in the professional contract. That's first question. Second is, do we clarify with the client at the beginning for all those 3 contracts, or is a process to define step by step?
Interesting. So I'd like to share that in my next slide. The second question about how do we process this. So this is a process for a coach to know that if you're partnering with a client, these all elements are there. Now, this could be just kept as professional contract only, or administrative contract could be a part of that. Psychological contract is invisible. It's not visible. Yeah, so it's all about if we put this 3 in the category, or maybe we look at just a professional contract and agreement. It could be just written with what both the parties are agreeing to. Let's say if a client says that I want to work on my personal growth, Okay, what does that mean for that? If that could be explicitly explored, maybe 3-4 points. Maybe I'm looking at personal growth, I'm looking at some sort of clarity in my life. Okay, and then what are the aspects that are involved in this process? Educating the client. So before we get into a contract and agreement, the pre-contracting stage is where I educate my client that about confidentiality, about the fees, about the goals. Okay, let's say if the client is not comfortable, if the coach is not comfortable on certain aspects, maybe we don't waste time. We just say, why don't you go to somebody else? I may not be expertise in that area to work with you. And how are people feeling so far? Are they with me, or is it too technical for them? Just want to check in.
Basically, all questions related with the topics about the contract. There's a concrete one. So there's a quite practical question from a coach. It says that the client bought 12 coaching service and paused in between. So the coach has connect with the client several times, but has not been restored. So do you have any suggestion at this situation? And the contact is client showed the positive feedback to the coach.
Okay, so what I understand, just clarifying with you, that the client contracted for 12 sessions.
Yes.
And then in between of the session, and the feedback was very good on the ongoing journey.
Yes.
And the client stopped.
Yes.
And the client stopped, and there is no communication.
The coach has tried to connect with the client several times, but didn't really, it's not restored, it's not reconnected. Yeah.
Yes. So I would like to go a little different here. Okay. Now, for example, if I connect to the client 3 times and the client has no response, there are 2 things. One is maybe the client has achieved the goal, what they wanted to. Okay. So maybe that's the reason the client doesn't want to connect. Second, there is all this whole global pandemic, so we do not know what the client is going through, maybe financially, personally, professionally. Okay, so I could probably reflect as a coach, maybe there could be a possibility of that and go for a supervision, a coaching supervision, where to explore what is happening to me as a coach. Okay, if the client has stopped suddenly, what is happening to me? There is something internally churning, going within me, which is maybe disturbing me that, hey, your feedback is good, I'm excellent coach, the work is going well, what made you stop? Okay, so is it a question for the client, or is it a question for the coach? What am I experiencing internally? Okay. Because there is a freedom of choice. If the client doesn't want to continue or happy with that goal, okay, then maybe the client doesn't want to, or there is a communication gap or style the client maintains when they have to communicate difficult conversation.
Okay, I think the response on track.
Okay. And also to highlight that there is a psychological contract which has got impacted between the coach and the client, or between the coach and the coach himself or herself. Okay. And this is, I have gone through this multiple times in my life, many a time, zillions of times, where the client doesn't respond. And then I'm like, hey, I did best coaching. The client was happy. And what happened now? And over a period of time, I learned that, hey, maybe that was my journey with that client. Can I let go from me, from my head?
Okay.
Can I continue with the next? There are many questions. Maybe I can continue with some more slides and come back with questions. Would that be okay?
Yeah.
And I thank you all for asking questions, because questions help us to go deeper in the conversation. And keep asking questions in the Q&A. It's good to, collect and revert to you in case if I'm not able to address it in today's session as well. So now when we look at this contract as an understanding that why is it important? Because we are working on the goal of the client. And the goal can be explicitly coming in with the professional clarity, administrative clarity, and psychological clarity. And now when we also look at that if you want to achieve this goal at the bottom, like how can I, technically I know I contract with my client wants to work on a goal, but how are we sure that client is going to partner with me 100% in that coaching space? And for that, we look at the bottom of the pyramid. And the bottom of the pyramid goes deeper, the need for psychological contract, psychological safety of the coach, of the client, of the process as a whole. And we look at that in three major categories. One is called permission, one is called protection, and one is called potency. So when we look at permission, is that like when we delve into the deeper areas of the client, maybe the client beliefs, values, or client experiences on something that they're sharing, and you want to delve deeper, are you taking enough permission in the coaching process? For example, are you comfortable if I can confront you here, or are you comfortable if I can challenge you here? So that's where I do permission before asking the question. At the same time, we're also looking at permission is to go deeper, and protection is to guard wherever the client is. Like, for example, if the client says that, hey, I'm not comfortable exploring my feelings about the space, about my working relation with my boss. And if the client is not comfortable, we don't go there again, because the client is not ready yet fully to partner with you. So we talk about protection here. So when we look at the permission and protection are like the tug of war, the client and the coach and the client are engaged in. And if as a coach, if you're able to give permission and protection, or establish permission and protection in that coaching space, the potency, that's where we call it as the comfort level of the client to be himself or herself, or building that comfort level that I can be my best in this coaching session. I feel very comfortable with my coach. So that comes out with permission and protection. Okay, so when we look at permission, protection, potency is like the potent energy that comes out in the coaching session that establishes trust and intimacy in the coaching space. That means your psychological contract gets established right before you contract with the client. That means a client walking in from the door to my office, and the way I communicate with the client, okay, do you want to talk about this right now, or what is that brings you here today? From the conversation, the language is more inviting rather than telling or suggesting. So when you create an inviting conversation, you build a lot of trust and intimacy in the process. So in my private practice, whenever I'm working, or in the corporates when I'm doing coaching, it is very important I make sure that I meet the client first. That means whoever is supposed to go for coaching, I need to talk to that person. And I need to tell the person, this is what coaching is all about, and are you comfortable to engage with me in the coaching session? So in my private practice, I'll give you an example where I had a couple who said that my son needs coaching, and we want him to be work on certain aspects of his life, and spoke to me for almost 15-20 minutes. I educated the client, and I told him that I want to meet with your son, and I want to talk to him, and I'm going to share with him about what I do, what I offer in my service. And if that gives him comfort, then I would like to work and get into a contract, working with that particular client. At the same time, in corporates, whenever I work, I make it a point to ask the client, the sponsor, that it is good practice to talk to that client who is going to be engaged with me. And if the client can choose that, okay, and say that, hey, I want to work with this coach, then we can move to the agreement of getting into coaching. But many times, many coaches we tend to ignore this part, or just we don't explore this aspect of it. And then the statements like, hey, I never wanted to work with you. It was because of the organizational pressure I have to be coached. Where there are two aspects, whether I wanted to work with you or I do not believe in coaching space. So when you build this kind of conversation, explicit conversation with the client, it creates a great psychological safety. And then you work with the client on their goals with professional space. Okay, so if there are any questions here before I move to the next slide, any question pertaining to this slide, I'll be happy to answer.
Okay, I think there's another practical questions. I can translate for you. With the exchange of the external, business running situation, the purpose and the meaning of coaching with a client become blur, and even clients ask to redesign the contract, even request to reduce the fee. So how to handle the situation usually?
Yeah, because again, when we talk about how is it coming across to me? The client says that I want to recontract, a sponsor, I would say, says that we want to recontract with you, for better rates. Okay, and that can also lead a lot of psychological unrest for a coach, because we agreed on certain aspects to work with. Now, if I look at, as a coach, I look at it from two angles. One is if the business around, if the organization is going through some sort of turbulence in their business, and that you can sense in that being in the coaching space, you have a choice to make whether do you want to continue with a recontract, or the second is to probably terminate the contract on agreement, because looks like this is something which is not comforting you as a coach. And because it's very important for your own psychological safety. If you're not happy, let's say, if the client delays a payment and says, I'll make it in the other week, and that is disturbing to you, and you still take the session with that client, you're self-sabotaging as a coach. It's important to bring that explicitly. Okay, this is a discomfort space. Now, in my personal practice, in my private practice, if a client is delaying a payment, I would like to bring that to a conversation, a very open dialogue, that this is a discomfort space. How can we address this? Now, that open dialogue is not that I will not do your coaching, or it's not about being rude or shrewd, but you're being very vocal about what is discomforting you. Remember, the invisible elephants are the discomforts. If we do not address them, okay, they will keep on growing within us, and then create a disturbance in our own coaching. We're not in the space with the client then. Yeah, to have an open dialogue, or you can recontract. If you're not comfortable working with that client, you can take a call, because if the administrative contract is a change all at a sudden, it is going to lead a lot of unrest for the coach. Okay, coach psychological safety. And so this is a small case study that you can look at. Betty approached a coach named John for life coaching. Now, John was a novice to the profession, was very new to this profession. John began the session without outlining his contract details with complete clarity. Now, the sessions continued with John struggling to understand or work around Betty's goals. John was also unable to handle the client's frequent calls, as it has completely disturbed his routine. He was unable to gain the trust of the client, as the client further felt the session did not give her any results. What should have John done at the beginning of the client-coach relationship? How could he have managed the process to establish trust? And the answer to this is, again, coming back to this model. If we are able to establish clear contract, clear agreements, then Betty would never call John, okay, and disturb, because she was not even aware that is it okay to call or not to call. She just simply called. So moving to that earlier question, that how do you coaching in private practice, is I call it as a pre-contracting stage, where you educate the inquiry. I don't say client, because the person is not registered yet for your service. You educate the inquiry, what is coaching and what is not coaching, how the process of coaching works, what are the number of sessions offered, financial fees involved, the intake written agreement. I also share with the client with some blogs and videos to understand what is coaching and how is it different from the other services. This is something which I call it as a pre-contracting stage or pre-agreement stage, or what agreement can be established if we continue. And if the client is going for more than 12 or 15 sessions, which we call it as a long-term coaching session. So on the stage 1 or session 1, we look at what are the 3 or 4 goals that we can explore in this 15-20 sessions. But if not, if the client is only contracting for 1 session, then you just look at what is that the client is bringing in the coaching session. And then you continue with all the sessions, but also you may mindfully be aware when to take a review session, your ongoing feedback about the coaching sessions, and also the cancellation process of when to cancel, is it okay to cancel? So this particular space helps the coach in a private practice to be a very successful coach, because you're very clear about what is expected from you, expected from the client, and the partnership between you both. And so we move to the next part, which is the most important and interesting aspect. Whatever we have learned now, we just apply it in the corporate space. Now, here you see this model, which I've created by my own, coaching contract with organization. So here you see SPOC or HR, that's called single point of contact, or human resource team approaches a coach. Now, when when an HR or SPOC approaches a coach, it's important for the coach to talk about or ask the client, what are the different goals we're looking at? Organizational goals, professional goals, and personal and individual goals. So it's very important to educate the client, or here we say this, the SPOC or HR, about what is coaching and how the process works. A lot of time, though coaching is getting introduced, but a lot of time people are not even aware what exactly coaching is. They feel it's coaching, mentoring all together. But then it's important to address, as a coach, what can you offer? So I talk about the professional development aspect, the administrative aspect, to share with the SPOC and HR. So now the coach and HR are talking about what exactly the coaching we offer. Like, for example, if I'm offering from Matrix, I will say this is what we do in a coaching process. And then we get introduced to the sponsor or different stakeholders. That means the client has not yet come. So the stakeholders or sponsor would come in a joint meeting where you, as a coach, talk to the HR and sponsor about how do you what kind of process of coaching is established, or how do you contract, or how the whole process would look like from start to end. So some sort of coaching education is what I call it as, to impart in the SPOC and the sponsor or the stakeholders to know what are they going to get engaged into. And if you notice, at the center of everything is the client. So when you're introducing them, after the sponsor and SPOC, what wants to work with you in terms of your administrative contract is clear, the fees are talked about, and then they introduce you to the clients, and then you talk to the client. Make sure before you start the coaching sessions, you talk to the client, talk to them about who are you as a coach, introduce about your service to them, and let them get the feeling that, hey, this is the person I want to work with. And that conversation needs to be a part of your contract. Because in that case, what happens is everybody is very crystal clear of what are we going to get engaged in. And the interesting part is a very important part to look at this particular model is the client's safety. So if tomorrow a sponsor says that, hey, I want to know how is X doing in a coaching session, and you answer that question from they call you up and you talk to them. But it's important to ask the client that, the client, this is your sponsor was talking, or your boss was asking about how are you doing. So why wouldn't it be a good opportunity for you to make a presentation in front of your boss? So here, again, we're not answering directly to the sponsor, but we are making sure the client is answering to the sponsor. And that's where we call the psychological safety. At any point of time in my professional practice, I do not answer to these queries. I invite the client to answer it. And that has been one of the success factor, that is the coach, the client, and confidentiality and their goals. This is the triangle that is very important to be established. If that works very well, the goals are achieved. The client is ready to work with you longer. So I'm going to be pausing here, being mindful about the time. I would like to set the last 10 minutes for any questions that are arising from this conversation.
There's some people say it's great to share, very authentic, and also when you share the confidentiality, encourage the client to share with his or her boss. That's a great idea. There's also a practical question. So what if the client in a corporate context want to discuss with the coach about leaving the company?
Yeah, that was one of my questions as well in the next slide. And the whole point here is, as I said, that again, we go back to that same diagram. Okay, coach, client, goals, confidentiality. Okay, the client is saying that I am planning to leave the organization. Is it anything to deal with the goals of the session? So again, my point here is, as a coach, my role is, because the client is confiding in me something the client feels about their current state in that organization, and that is nothing to deal with the goals. It's just some sort of additional what we say comfort the client wants to share, or has a comfort with you. That's the reason client wants to share with you. So for me, in my private practice and professional practice, I believe in confidentiality. So I do not bring that to the organization, because that's not a part of my contract. First. Second is, the client is confiding in me something which is very, very confidential. How can I leak that to the organization? Because the organization is working on certain goals that I'm working as a coach. The parallel question, if the client confides in you something about the personal life, okay, would you be able to talk to the sponsor HR? The answer is no. Then why, if the client is saying that I want to resign from the company, would become a big deal for the coach that, hey, I have to now confide this to the sponsor or the HR? No. The client is sharing this because the client feels comfortable being in your space, being in this coaching space. And as a person, I feel anything that is shared by the client, unless it's harming self or harming anybody, the rest remains very confidential. So again, I look at this triangle. This triangle is very important, the confidentiality part. Okay, so is there any other question that's coming for you before I move to the last slide? The last slide talks a little bit about the questions for exploration. How do we set communication between coach, client, and stakeholders? Learning this particular diagram, I'm just referring to these questions. How do we set review meetings in a corporate setup? How do we know that client is ready for coaching in a corporate setup? What will you do if your client confides that I'm planning to resign? How will you set clear boundaries between decision maker asking for feedback about that client? Using this framework shared, what will be your approach as a coach to bring everyone on the same page while setting up the coaching contract or agreement with the client and the company? And if you're coaching two senior leaders together on a particular goal, is it okay to coach one of them who approaches you for personal coaching as well? And the reference that I want to make it is this particular model. If you follow this model successfully, you'll be always in a safe space. You'll always be able to give more protection for your client and make sure that there's a lot of confidentiality maintained between you and your client, and that is not out in the air at any point of time.
Yeah, I think Paris, maybe the time you give a lot in this limited time.
Yes. So if you would like to connect with me, you can always connect on the social media platforms that I have shared. And yes, if you are looking to to be a coach, or if you're looking to work with more about coaching, do connect. I'll be happy to support you in whatever best possible way. So before we could close today's session, is there any one thing that you felt that was your key learning from today's session? If you want to put that in the chat, I'll be happy to support as well.
Okay. Some people say they didn't see the slide. Maybe you can show again. They can screen save.
Yeah. So you can always search for Dr. Paris in all of these, and you'll be able to connect with me.
So I can see the keywords people write: partnership, psychological contract, care client in a detailed way, agreement. I think that's permission and protection. Very clear explanation about the contract.
Right.
Yeah, that's basically their takeaway.
Excellent.
Yeah, the contract system. So on behalf of Zhao Qian, the organizer of this activity, we want to show our deep gratitude and big thanks to you. And we all are impressed with your profound experience and great support to everyone.
谢谢。后续的话
And we'll send you a small gift for Thanksgiving for this activity, for your contribution. Okay.
Thank you, everybody. It was really nice, and I look forward to and wishing everybody all the best in your coaching journey, and please stay connected.